Hi there, everyone. Mychal Bryan here from the Oraculos School of Astrology, and today we are continuing our medical astrology series. Now, within the context of medical astrology, I think it's very important for us to bear in mind what the scope of our practice is. And for me, scope of practice means that we are very clear on what we can do as medical astrologers versus what we shouldn't even be attempting to do at all. And diagnosis is something that is strictly outside of the realm of the medical astrologer. Now, this is a bit of a conundrum because historically speaking, that is the exact reason why medical astrology was used. Medical astrology was used as a diagnostic tool within antiquity because the ancients were in a process of discovering various modes of assessing our human condition based on the tools available to them. Astrology was always a central tool available to the ancients in terms of assessing our human state. And from this, we have other schools rising out of the East, other schools of physical, physiological, psychological, spiritual diagnosis arising out of practices such as Ayurveda. So in Ayurveda, we have a very elaborate system of pulse diagnosis, where an Ayurvedic practitioner reads the pulse of their client as a means of assessing the constitutional balance or homeostasis of that client. From the East, both in India as well as ancient China, we have systems of diagnosing the overall constitution of a person based on studying that person's eyes, their palms, their nails, their tongue, and other parts of the body, which, though those parts may not be the body in its entirety, those parts still serve as a vital index for that person's internal physiological well-being. Medical astrology evolved alongside those practices as similarly being a diagnostic tool to particularly point in the direction of where a person was most constitutionally weak and where that person was most likely to fall ill within this lifetime. So from a macrocosmic perspective, medical astrology was used to, first of all, point out which systems of the body were most likely to be problematic for a person within their lifetime, and by extension of that, to then zero in on and pinpoint the specific organ in the body that was most likely to be impacted. This is something that, as far as I'm concerned, is still very much within the wheelhouse of possibility for the medical astrologer. And in my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, I go into great detail as to how we can carry out this form of quote-unquote astrological assessment in the 21st century. Now, in the 20th century, we had medical astrologers such as Max Heindel and his wife, Augusta Foss Heindel, writing books specifically about astrodiagnosis and specifically using that term astrodiagnosis within their literature. 100 years later, we don't necessarily have that same luxury because the term diagnosis within the 21st century is one that we specifically use within the context of allopathic medicine or complementary medicine. And it's to this end that I tell a lot of my students at Oraculos that if you would like to more publicly utilize your skills as a medical astrologer in a diagnostic fashion, then it behooves you to go out and acquire some other area of non-astrological study that allows you to practice in a diagnostic way. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go through 10 years of allopathic medical school. You can very well study Ayurveda, for example, and become an Ayurvedic counselor, an Ayurvedic health consultant. You could even become an Ayurvedic doctor. There are many pathways available to us today in the West. Underneath the umbrella of that, you can use your medical astrology skills and tools because Ayurveda from India has always been friendly towards the idea and the notion of medical astrological diagnostics or medical astrology assessment. When I was studying Ayurveda, one of the things that I learned from my teacher of Ayurveda was that in India, there are even Ayurvedic doctors who won't even take you in as a patient before they have first studied your natal chart. Because in India, within the context of Ayurveda, it is held to be universally true that the natal chart holds the index, or that the natal chart is the index for our health and vitality and baseline of homeostasis within this lifetime. Whether that's Ayurveda, whether that's herbalism, whether that's traditional Chinese medicine, the world is our oyster, as it were, in terms of finding a home within complementary medicine for the skills that we're acquiring within the context of medical astrology. Now, medical astrology at its most mildest can describe our basic constitution within this lifetime, and it can also pinpoint areas that we need to pay attention to. I think that that is completely within the scope of our practice as medical astrologers, especially as less experienced medical astrologers, to be able to describe to somebody what is going on within them at this moment as an extension of describing to that person who they are, what their personality is, what their likes and dislikes are. It's completely within the scope of our practice as astrologers to take that one step further and say to a person that, hey, as a result of you being a sweet, loving, kind Venusian person, maybe you like to consume foods that are of that nature as well. Maybe you like to consume foods that make you feel good. And as a result of consuming feel-good foods, that might possibly cause you to lean a little bit heavily in the direction of overindulgence, whether that's overindulgence in quote-unquote comfort food, or whether that's overindulgence in sweets, because we know that Venus is also the planet that we associate with sugar. Therefore, it could be wise for you to just be a little bit more mindful about your level of sweets consumption within this lifetime. At this level of practice, we're not really going in and telling a person to make major alterations to their constitution. We're not going in and suggesting surgeries that these people should pursue. We're not going in and suggesting medications that these people should take. We're not really going in and suggesting anything that is of a harmful nature by saying to a person, constitutionally speaking, it seems as if there is a tendency towards you being a Venusian person and enjoying the sweeter and finer side of life in general, whether that's in terms of your relationships, whether that's in terms of the things that you're consuming, whether that's in terms of anything within your life. That tends to be your nature in general. And by extension, perhaps this might impact you physiologically in terms of the sorts of food and beverages you find yourself consuming in this lifetime. That, for me, is the lowest hanging fruit of medical astrology, and I think it's completely within the scope of all of our practices as natal astrologers in general, or medical astrologers specifically, to be able to impart that sort of information to our clients. Now, for the medical astrologer who has had a longer period of practice, who has also studied other fields of either complementary medicine or even allopathic medicine. For the medical astrologer who has more tools to assist and more tools to help their clients than the average natal astrologer who only has natal astrology as their background, that more seasoned and advanced medical astrologer has within the scope of their possibilities the ability to speak more specifically and more directly about parts of a person's constitution, it's important for us to remember that under the auspices of medical astrology, we really shouldn't be leaning too far in the direction of specific diagnosis. So, for example, at Oraculos, we've studied innumerable charts in which afflictions to Venus could specifically denote issues within a person's ability to metabolize sugar within this lifetime. And one such affliction that I'm thinking about is Venus in Virgo afflicted by Neptune. That could be Venus in Virgo conjunct Neptune, Venus in Virgo square Neptune, opposite Neptune, quincunx Neptune. All of these hard aspect relationships to Neptune with the Venus in Virgo could indicate that a person's digestive system does not have what it takes in order to adequately digest and metabolize sugar within this lifetime. And so I have come up with the term sugar-based health concerns, which in my mind truly has only ever meant diabetes. However, knowing that I'm not going to teach my students that they should see that combination and say diabetes out of their mouth to their clients, I don't say diabetes to my clients. Therefore, when I see the Venus in Virgo afflicted by Neptune, one of the things I say in an assessment of that Venus in Virgo afflicted by Neptune is that this combination that we see within your chart is a combination that we oftentimes find within the charts of people whose bodies do not adequately process sugar within this lifetime. Therefore, you should be a little bit more mindful of your own sugar consumption. Maybe this is something that you should speak to your naturopathic physician about, or even your allopathic physician about, or your acupuncturist or your Ayurvedic practitioner, and see whether or not they can give you more information through whatever diagnostic tests they may run to say whether or not this information is valid for you. And tell them that your medical astrologer said that there are combinations within your chart that suggest a slow, sluggish digestive system, or that you have a cold gut. They know what to do with that information, because within the realm of Ayurveda, that is a realm where they work with this language of cold gut. Within the realm of acupuncture, that is a realm where they work with this language of cold gut. Within the realm of herbalism, that is where they work with this language of cold, sluggish digestive system. So if you go to people who have the ability to speak in that way and understand what that means, they can recommend to you certain courses of action or certain courses of treatment that you can utilize to correct or alleviate those problems within your physical constitution. However, it is no medical astrologer's privilege to be able to suggest to somebody that they should take this particular tincture or this particular herb or this particular vitamin or this particular supplement, because those things and the ability to prescribe anything to anybody is strictly beyond the scope of a medical astrologer's practice. Prescription is nowhere within the scope of a medical astrologer's practice. And this is something that I find myself having to say again and again to students within the 21st century, because we as an astrological community are deeply enamored by everything that doesn't have to do with astrology. We are enamored by the financial markets. Therefore, we want to elect ourselves as financial astrologers without knowing the first thing about the Dow Jones, without knowing the first thing about what's going on Wall Street, without knowing the first thing about the stock market. We want to elect ourselves as financial astrologers without having any understanding at all about the financial marketplace. Similarly, we want to elect ourselves as astrocartographers without knowing the first thing about geography as a basic foundational skill that you should have as somebody practicing astrocartography. We don't know anything about geography, and furthermore, we don't even understand the astronomical principles that define the lines that we're looking at on an astrocartography map. All we know is don't go to your Mars line, don't go to your Pluto line, don't go to your Saturn line without having the slightest idea about how that line ended up on the map to begin with. We just don't know stuff. And similarly, within the context of medical astrology, we have within ourselves as astrologers, and we've always had this deep desire to be of assistance. And the astrological community tends to attract people who have this very deep desire to be of assistance. And very often we have a deep desire to be of assistance within astrology. And sometimes we don't come with adjacent skills from other fields. Sometimes we're just people who know that we want to be of service or we want to be of help, but we have no previous training in any other field at all other than the astrology that we're trying to enter. And we put ourselves in a position to begin speaking to people about their medical problems with no previous understanding. Oftentimes, people who practice medical astrology don't even have a rudimentary understanding of biology, have never sat in an anatomy and physiology course before, whether in university, or whether in community college. They've just never done that work before, but yet elect themselves as medical astrologers. This is a big problem. And especially within the case of the medical astrology consultation, we as astrologers need to have a fundamental understanding of very basic things. And at the very minimum, everybody who is practicing medical astrology needs to go and sit down for 3 months in a community college anatomy and physiology course. We should at least have some modicum of pride in what we do, and also some modicum of responsibility that we place upon ourselves to have an understanding of this human vehicle that we're going to be speaking to our clients about in a way that is a little bit more elegant than saying that the hip bone is connected to the knee bone. So, our access to information that has the ability to positively augment our overall practice of astrology is vaster now than it has ever been before. And all of us have the ability to reach out and grasp those tools that will make us better astrologers. So, the point at which you've mastered astrology and you understand everything that you will ever do in terms of the framework of what you will do within an actual astrological reading, the things that will assist you at being a better astrologer are 1, practicing your astrology every single day, but 2, going out and finding other skills and other tools from non-astrological fields that you can bring into your astrological endeavors that will enrich those endeavors and make you even better at your craft. And similarly, within medical astrology, if I'm wanting to practice medical astrology as a basic addition to my astrological skills, I'll go and take that 3-month course in anatomy and physiology at my local community college. If I'm wanting to extend those skills further to a diagnostic level, I'll go and study the Ayurveda for the 2 years. I'll go and study the traditional Chinese medicine and become an acupuncturist, however long that takes, because these things do not hurt us as astrologers. These skills and these tools and these disciplines only stands to bolster what it is we can do. And the more respect we attain within other non-astrological spheres of life, the more we stand to actually be able to bring more respect to the field of astrology in general. So thank you so much for listening to this first part of our deep dive into the actual realm of chart interpretation through medical astrology. And I thought it was important for us to start in this way because far too often as astrologers, we start from the inside without giving any context for how to get there in the first place. And I think before we even begin the art of medical astrology delineation, it is vitally important for us to have a context for what are we going to do with that information that we glean from the chart. What are we actually trying to say to our clients once we pull up that chart and see whatever that chart is saying about that client's constitution? What is going to come out of our mouth? And what internal doorways are we going to place in the front of that information before it actually comes out of our mouth? What are the internal ethical checkpoints we're going to take ourselves through before we say, I read Mychal Bryan's book and he said that this combination corresponds with endometriosis. Take this pill. It's not only an unintelligent way to practice, it's an unethical way to practice. Therefore, as practitioners of medical astrology, we need to have more conversations like this, because these conversations, they temper us. And these conversations slow us down. Because once again, very often in astrology, a field that has no government, oftentimes we go speeding out the front door without taking into consideration any of the things that we would take into consideration if we were practicing in any other field. So in the next video in this series, we're going to take a look at a person's natal chart through the lens of medical astrology and see whether or not we can extend the same level of intelligent and wise thinking beyond this conversation that we're having into that actual person's medical astrology delineation. I hope you enjoy and I hope you stay tuned. And as always, just so you know, the source book that I'm referencing as far as all of our medical astrology delineations are concerned is my book, The New Western Medical Astrology, which you can purchase a copy of on Amazon today. And within this book, you will also find a much larger discussion about this topic of scope of practice than the one that we've had here today. So I sincerely hope that you grab yourself a copy of this book and let me know how you feel about this topic of scope of practice down below in the comment section.